This video wasn't supposed to be posted. In fact, it wasn't even supposed to exist. I thought about deleting everything. I spent days with my finger hovering over the button. Erase. Delete. Pretend it never happened. But there's one thing that stops me. It's as if ever since I came back from that place, some part of me was left in there. If you're watching this now, it's because I decided to show it. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to. This is apartment 43, a place that has been closed for over 8 years since the former resident's disappearance. There was no fight, no scream, no farewell. She simply vanished, and no one ever managed to explain it. They say the police investigated, that the neighbors were interviewed, that they tried to reconstruct her steps, but they found nothing. No traces, no signs of forced entry, no body. What remained was silence, and her things, intact. The building continued to operate, but the door remained locked for years, until now. I'm not a detective, nor a medium, nor anything like that. I just rented the apartment. Curiosity, perhaps. Madness, more likely. But there was something about that ad. Something strange. The price was absurdly low. No photos of the interior, just the building's facade. And a short message. Apartment 43. Vacant. Immediate occupancy. When I asked if there was a problem, the realtor hesitated. He said it was better not to comment. He handed me the key, as if getting rid of a burden, and vanished. On the first day, everything seemed normal. A fine dust on the furniture, a strong smell of something closed up, dim lights but functional. Only, when I started reviewing the recorded camera footage, I realized there were things I didn't see live. Small clicks, a whisper, a door that seemed ajar, and then closed by itself. Nothing very clear, but enough to make me suspicious. And that's when I started recording everything. Every step. Every night, every sound. If you look closely, you'll see things even I didn't see when I was inside. Because the camera captures more than the eyes. It hears what the ear ignores. It observes what you don't want to see. Don't ask me if I believe in ghosts. I don't even know what to think anymore. I can only say this. If you keep watching, you'll understand why I almost deleted this video. But don't say later that I didn't warn you. The first thing I felt when I turned the key was the weight of the door. It didn't open easily, as if time had glued its hinges to the wall. It was a silent resistance, almost as if the apartment itself was refusing to be opened again. When I pushed, the smell came. It wasn't exactly mold. It was denser, like air stored for too long, mixed with old perfume and damp paper. The dust rose in the air like a mist, swirling under the dim light of the corridor. I took the first step and left the door ajar. Not for safety. It was just instinct. Something in me wanted to ensure an escape route. The floor creaked under my weight. The apartment wasn't big. Living room, bedroom, open-plan kitchen, and a bathroom. Everything with old but well-maintained furniture. The strangeness was that nothing seemed to have been touched. The dust was thick, yes, but the objects were all in place. There were no signs of mess, nor of invasion, nor of abandonment. It seemed like the person had gone out to buy bread and never came back. On the kitchen table, a plate with dried coffee stains and an oxidized spoon. In the sink, 2 glasses turned upside down. Beside the stove, a perfectly folded dishcloth, as if someone still cared to keep things in order. In the bedroom, I found a leather bag on the bed, dusty but intact. Beside it, a pair of shoes aligned on the floor. The covers were slightly pulled aside, as if someone had gotten up in the morning. Nothing else. No sign of a struggle, of haste, of urgency. It was the kind of silence that screamed. I picked up the camera and started recording. The lens slowly moved over the details. Yellowed wall, foggy mirrors, shelves full of books. Some titles were turned with the spine facing inward, as if hiding something. There were photo frames, no recent photos, all in sepia tones, with a woman smiling alone in different corners of the apartment. Always alone, even in party photos. On the shelf, I found an old binder, inside folded papers with notes. Nothing out of the ordinary. Bills, lists, reminders. But one page in particular caught my attention. Not for its content, but for the number of times it had been handled. The paper was crumpled, worn at the edges, and had a circular mark, perhaps from a glass or cup. On it, only a small table with dates. 3 were circled with a red pen. No explanation, just numbers. While filming, I heard a noise coming from the corridor. Low, almost a muffled sigh. The camera picked it up. I didn't. I kept walking, trying to narrate naturally, but my voice sounded out of place in that space, as if my words didn't belong in that environment, as if they were being pushed out. I went back to the living room. On the sofa, a precisely folded blanket. There was a body imprint, light, almost imperceptible, as if someone had spent many hours sitting there. The television was off, but the remote control, positioned facing the seat, indicated otherwise. In the corner of the shelf, there was a closed wooden box. It wasn't locked, but something in me decided not to open it. Not yet. There was an uncomfortable feeling, as if I was rummaging through a life that didn't belong to me. The camera trembled slightly in my hands. I thought it was nervousness. Only later, much later, I realized it wasn't that. I went back to the corridor. The walls were peeling, with small stains spreading like webs of dry paint. On the baseboard, I found a row of nails lined up as if someone had started hanging something and given up halfway. Above, a lamp hanging by exposed wires flickered for a second. Just 1 second. Enough to make me stop and record. At that moment, a door that was ajar slowly closed. The sound was so soft that it barely caught attention at the time, and I continued. I kept recording as I explored the apartment, but I didn't say anything else. The atmosphere seemed to swallow my voice. It was as if the air itself was denser, thicker, and any sound became strange inside. I recorded the kitchen cabinets, all organized. Old dishes, some with fine cracks, stored as if they were still useful. No trace of disorder, no indication that someone was fleeing. Above the refrigerator, I found a notepad with the name Carla, written in the upper corner. I imagine it was the name of the woman who lived there. The following pages were blank. Beside it, a key holder hung on the wall, with only one key attached, the mailbox key. I opened the bathroom door. The mirror was stained by time but still reflected well. In the sink, a dry toothbrush fallen to the side, and a towel hanging with faded red floral embroidery. The bathroom light flickered, as if there was a loose electrical connection, but it returned to normal as soon as I moved the camera away from the switch. I touched the mirror, not knowing why. I just pressed my fingers against it and felt the cold glass. Nothing out of the ordinary. I went back to the bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to process everything I was seeing. I picked up my phone and started reviewing the recorded clip so far. And that's when I noticed something strange. In the video, while I was filming the living room, there was a sound. A click. Small, distant, like the creak of wood under pressure. But at that moment, I hadn't heard anything. I stood still for a few seconds, trying to figure out if the sound came from the street, the plumbing, or my head. I rewound the video, turned up the volume. The sound was there. A dry click, as if someone stepped on a loose floorboard. I slowly stood up and went to the exact spot where the camera had picked up the noise. The living room was the same. Nothing seemed out of place. But when I started recording again, the camera flickered. It didn't turn off. It just froze for half a second. A sharp cut, as if it had skipped a frame. I continued recording, pretending to be natural, although I was already starting to feel the discomfort accumulating on my shoulders. I decided to leave my phone fixed on an improvised tripod in the living room, pointed at the corridor door. It would be a way to keep everything recorded while I did other things. I activated continuous recording and went to the kitchen, out of the camera's angle. I stayed there for about 20 minutes, just listening to the silence, breathing slowly. No sound other than the faint hum of the refrigerator and the muffled echo of my own footsteps. When I came back, something bothered me. The living room rug seemed slightly out of place. Not much, just a few centimeters, as if someone had stepped on it and dragged it while walking. I mentally reviewed everything I had done. I tried to remember if I myself might have moved it. Maybe. But I couldn't be sure. The doubt was worse than certainty. I put the rug back in place with my foot and resumed recording as if nothing had happened. In the last drawer of the bookshelf, I found a picture frame turned face down. It was different from the others. The frame was made of dark wood and seemed to have been heavily sanded. The photo was faded, and I could only see a dark blur behind. The woman, nothing clear, nothing sharp, but disturbing enough to make me turn the portrait over again. Before ending that first exploration, I decided to film all the rooms again, this time walking backward, ending at the point where I started. It was a silly ritual, but it made me feel like I had some control over what was happening, that I could retrace my steps, go back to the beginning as if I were closing a circle. In the last second of the recording, before turning off the camera, I captured something. I didn't see it at the time. I only realized hours later, reviewing the recorded material, with the video paused on the right frame, while the apartment seemed calm and silent. For a fraction of a second, in the reflection of the living room window, something appears. I don't know what it is. It has no defined shape. It doesn't move. It doesn't look. But it's there, between me and the door. The next morning, I sat on the living room sofa with a mug of warm coffee and the camera in my hand. I reviewed the previous night's files, slowly advancing through the images. With each frozen frame, my attention was divided between what I remembered seeing and what the camera in fact recorded, and the difference between the two was starting to bother me. The reflection in the window was still there, fixed at that specific second. I had already watched the clip at least 20 times. It didn't move. It didn't disappear. It didn't flicker. It was just a dark, faceless shape standing behind me. When I tried to zoom in, the video froze for a few seconds. Black screen. Then it came back. Maybe it was the camera, maybe the card. But it started there. In an attempt to better understand, I decided to rummage through what remained in the cupboards and drawers. I wasn't looking for clues exactly. It was more out of impulse, like someone trying to put together a puzzle without knowing the final image. In the first desk drawer, I found yellowed papers all carefully stacked. There were old bills, payment receipts, drafts with grocery lists, normal things. But among them, a folded sticky note caught my attention. I opened it slowly. The handwriting was thin, hurried. On the paper, only one sentence. They are inside the wall. I put the note away without commenting aloud. At the time, it seemed like something from a disturbed person. But what disconcerted me most was the fact that it was folded, hidden among routine papers, as if the person had written it and tried to forget they wrote it. On the shelf below, there was a small clear plastic box with faded labels. Inside, 4 cassette tapes. The covers were scratched, but on one of them I could read with difficulty, recording Euro 3, Aero 1H17. There was no visible sound system in the apartment, but I remembered an old radio I'd seen in the kitchen the day before, and I went there. It was a model with a tape input, covered by a thin layer of dust. I plugged the device in, and surprisingly, it still worked. The red light came on. I inserted one of the tapes, adjusted the volume, and pressed play. For the first few seconds, I only heard the sound of the recorder spinning. No music, no voice. Then a faint noise as if someone was holding the microphone while walking. Hissing, interference, a button click, and then a voice. Very low, deep, saying something I couldn't immediately understand. I rewound the tape and turned up the volume. It was a man. He spoke slowly as if dictating something, but the tape was degraded. Some words were lost in the noise. Others seemed cut off. In one section, he said, "When you're in the room, don't look. Wall." The tape choked and the sound was replaced by a high-pitched, uncomfortable tone that lasted about 3 seconds before the device turned off by itself. I tried to turn it back on, but it didn't respond. I removed the tape and set it aside. I returned to the box. I took out another one. This one had an almost illegible label. In the lower corner, something handwritten, "Do not play alone." I ignored the warning. I put it in the radio and pressed the play button. The audio began with silence. Then, a faint breathing sound. Long. Controlled. As if someone was waiting for something. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps, and a voice whispering something in the background repeatedly. It was impossible to understand, but the tone, it was of despair. Tight. Almost pleading. I stopped the tape before it finished. I got up from the chair and went to the living room. As I passed through the corridor, I heard a click coming from the left wall. I stopped instinctively. The camera was still recording, hanging from my neck. I looked at the exact spot where the sound came from. Nothing out of the ordinary, but there was something in the air, a kind of pressure, as if the silence was being forced in there. I pointed the camera at the baseboard and zoomed in slightly. There was a thin crack in the wall, right near the floor. Nothing much. It could just be time, humidity, anything. But it gave me an uncomfortable feeling, as if I was being watched from within. I went back to the bookshelf, trying to push the thought away. On the bottom shelf, I found a blue folder. Inside, there were several bound papers stapled in blocks. They weren't official documents. They were typed texts, printed with faded ink. The first page had no title. The content seemed like a kind of personal account, but the language was confused, truncated, as if translated from another language. There were strange repetitions, displaced words, and entire paragraphs crossed out with a black pen. The text spoke about accumulated echoes and repetition frequencies. It mentioned objects that recorded without being plugged in, and spaces where time does not follow a direct line. I closed the folder. That was beyond what I could understand. Before turning off the camera, I looked at the screen and noticed a quick glitch. The image trembled for a second and returned. Something was starting to affect the equipment. And for the first time, I felt a real impulse to stop. But I didn't stop. I spent the rest of the afternoon sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by the tapes and papers scattered around me. The more I tried to organize the content, the more confused everything became. Nothing connected clearly. It was as if every piece of that story had been intentionally left incomplete. Small open gaps, waiting to be filled by someone who was there long enough. I decided to review the section of the recording where the image had glitched. I pressed play. In the first few seconds, the camera seemed normal, but as soon as I approached the exact moment, the image froze. The audio continued, but the video paused for almost a second. When it resumed, a faint hiss appeared in the background, like distant static. I rewound the video. Again. This time, I paused the video frame by frame. In one of the frozen frames between the image and the blur, there was something strange reflected on the turned-off TV screen in the living room. It was very subtle, but the silhouette didn't look like mine. It was shorter. It was turned towards me, and it didn't appear at any other moment. I put the video aside and went to the kitchen. I needed anything to remind me that I was still dealing with reality. I opened the refrigerator on impulse. Inside, a sour, damp smell escaped. There was a bottle of water and an ice tray. That's all. The rest was empty, as if it had never truly been used. In the cabinet above the sink, I found a small wooden box. Unlocked, but with an old latch. Upon opening it, there were envelopes. All empty, but each one had a phrase written on the inside of the flap. Handwritten, like intimate reminders. If you hear 3 knocks, don't answer. Mirrors only show what has already passed. Don't call out for anyone. I closed the box. And at that exact moment, the kitchen lamp flickered twice. The camera was on the tripod but still recording. I looked at the lens. It also flickered. A discreet flash, as if it had restarted itself. I went back to the living room. I picked up one of the texts from the blue folder and sat on the floor to reread. There was a part I hadn't noticed before, an isolated paragraph between two pen marks. The excerpt said, "If you're reading this, you've already crossed the line. It's not about seeing, it's about recording. They don't need to be seen. They just need to be recorded." I read that more than once. The text seemed written in a warning tone. It had no recipient. It was like a draft for oneself. But the repetition of the idea of recording disturbed me. The camera, the tapes, the reflections, everything pointed to a pattern. I went back to the radio and tried to listen to the third tape, but the device no longer responded. The red light wouldn't come on. I unplugged and replugged it. Nothing. I picked up the tape and looked at the spool. It had broken inside, as if something had violently jammed. I didn't force it. I put the tape aside. In an attempt to find something else, I dragged the living room sofa. Underneath, only accumulated dirt and some loose wires. But in the corner, right against the wall, there was a small metallic object. I carefully picked it up. It was an old shirt button with remnants of dark thread. Nothing much, except for the fact that it had a letter engraved on it. C. The same C I saw on the kitchen notepad. Carla. I thought about how that button ended up there. No missing clothes in the closet. No torn pieces. No sign that someone had lost it by accident. But the object was there, leaning against the wall like a silent reminder that this space had too much history and too few answers. It was already getting dark when I decided to review the files one last time. The video I left recording from the living room, with the camera fixed on the tripod, was just over an hour long. I skipped directly to the last 10 minutes. For most of the time, everything seemed normal. But at 58 minutes, something passed in front of the lens. Quick, almost imperceptible. A movement that caused no sound, no shadow. A slight darkening on the side of the image. A displacement. I rewound a few times to be sure, frame by frame. In one of them, I saw the living room curtain move slightly, even with no wind, even with the window closed. And there, in the fold of the fabric, a small white mark, like a fingerprint. That night, I decided to leave the camera on longer. I wanted to record everything, all the rooms from all possible angles. I moved the tripod around the house while doing small tasks. Nothing much. Opening and closing doors, rummaging through drawers, testing the lights. At first glance, it seemed like just my obsession. But deep down, I was trying to prove that there was nothing there. Meanwhile, the camera watched in silence. I reviewed the videos that same dawn. I had already gotten used to spending hours pausing clips, zooming in on reflections, listening to whispers that might not even have been there. But in that review, something immediately caught my attention. It was the kitchen video. I recorded while organizing the cabinets. In this part, the ambient sound was constant. The faint hum of the refrigerator, the sound of objects being placed on the counter. Until at 17 minutes, there's a strange interval. The sound disappears for 2 seconds. Then it comes back, but it's not the same. A breath appears in the background, deep, drawn out. And the strangest thing, it doesn't match the rhythm of mine. It's out of sync. Neither stronger nor weaker, just different, as if it came from somewhere else. I rewound the section and turned up the volume. The breath was there, clear, as if someone was standing behind the camera while I continued with my tasks. But I didn't see anything. I didn't feel anything. I kept watching. In the living room recording, while I was tidying the bookshelf, there's a moment when the corridor door appears ajar in the background. I remember leaving it like that, but in the video, it moves by itself. Slowly, it closes carefully. No sound, no wind. The most unsettling thing wasn't seeing it happen. It was realizing that while everything was occurring, I was talking, explaining what I was doing. not noticing anything, completely oblivious to the movement the camera had recorded. I stopped watching for a few minutes. I looked around the apartment. Everything was the same. The same yellowish light, the same silence. But something inside me was starting to break, a small part deep down that no longer trusted what my eyes saw. I picked up my phone and recorded a voice note to myself. I wanted to record, in a raw way, what I was feeling at that moment. I spoke about the door, the breath, what I saw in the videos. I spoke about the doubt, how difficult it was to continue without knowing what was really happening. Or worse, if it was happening. Reviewing this audio hours later, I heard something at the end of the recording. A click. Faint. Almost imperceptible. As if the recording had been paused for an instant and then resumed. But I didn't pause it. I went back to the living room video. I skipped to a section where I was facing away from the camera, tidying the books. At that moment, the image subtly flickers. A shadow crosses the screen, moving horizontally. Very fast. It's not a cut. It's not a lens defect. It's something passing in front of the lens and blocking the light for less than a second. I paused. Rewound. Frame by frame. In one of the frames, you can see a piece of the curtain moving in. Response. As if that displacement had caused a slight swirl in the air. But in the subsequent recording, everything remains still. I took the notebook where I had been jotting down the times of strange occurrences. I noted this one as 0341, shadow crossing lens plus air movement. I wrote nothing else. I let the pen drop on the table and leaned back against the wall, staring at the camera. It was there, standing, on, looking back at me. At that moment, I started to wonder, if I turned everything off now, deleted the files, left this place, would I be able to go back to being who I was? Or had I already crossed the point where doubt settles in and never leaves? The answer didn't come. But the camera kept recording. The next morning, I left the camera on for over 5 hours. I placed it on the living room sideboard, pointed at the corridor. I did nothing during that time. I just left the equipment running while I stayed in the back in silence. I wanted to see what happened when no one was around. Or at least, when I wasn't in frame. When I reviewed the recording, everything started normally. Stable image, constant light, no prominent sound. But at Auditor 12 Bamit Manor, a dry noise appeared in the audio. Like wood cracking under pressure, the corridor remained empty. The camera didn't move. But the shadow of the bathroom door, previously projected in a straight line on the floor, seemed to change shape for 3 seconds. Then it returned to normal. Seeing that caused me an unease I can't quite describe. It was as if the apartment, even empty, was adjusting on its own. As if it was preparing for something that hadn't happened yet. And I was only observing the surface. In the sequence of the video, the camera began to lose focus. Slowly and progressively, as if it was trying to record something it couldn't identify. The image blurred, then returned, then blurred again. There was no one passing by, no visible movement, but the camera reacted as if something was moving in the environment. I noted the time. Meanwhile, I tried to occupy my mind. I went back to the bedroom. I picked up the notepad and started organizing the records. The list was already long. Times, sounds, distortions, subtle movements. I tried to cross-reference the data, looking for a pattern. But there was no logic. The phenomena happened without warning, without repetition, without explanation. And what bothered me most was that everything happened when I wasn't looking. Whenever I was there, in the moment, everything seemed normal. But when I looked through the lens later, the apartment showed another version of itself. During the night, I left the camera recording again, this time in the bedroom. I positioned it on the dresser, facing the bed and the window. I lay down with my cell phone in my hand, pretending to be relaxed, but my entire body was alert. I pretended to sleep. But I listened to every sound, every creak, trying to perceive if anything moved without being caught by my eyes. I woke up 3 hours later with the camera light still on. I reviewed the video right there in the dark with the screen's glow illuminating the room. At 36 minutes of recording, while I was motionless in bed, something appeared in the reflection of the window. This time, unlike the figure in the living room, there was movement. A figure slowly passed behind me. It had no defined shape, but its outline was more visible than the other times. It was short, narrow, featureless. Just a dark, diffuse body walking behind the bed. I stopped the video, rewound, frame by frame. On the 9th repetition, something new caught my attention. In the image following the figure, my body, which had been motionless before, moved slightly. Just a little, as if it had felt something, a spasm, an involuntary reflex. But at that moment, I didn't wake up. I just moved my arm, as if I had felt cold, or a presence. That left me motionless for a few seconds, not out of fear, but out of uncertainty. Was it possible that I was feeling something? That my body was perceiving what my consciousness ignored? Or was the camera recording more than it should? I got up and went to the bathroom mirror. I turned on the light. I looked at myself for a few minutes. Nothing abnormal. Same gaze, same face. But there was something in my expression that didn't seem like mine. A different kind of tiredness. Not physical, almost internal. While I was there, the camera fell from the dresser, by itself. The sound echoed dryly through the house. I ran back to the bedroom. The tripod was still standing. The camera just slipped and fell, or was pulled. The video was interrupted at the exact second of the fall. I picked up the equipment, reviewed the last segment. Before falling, there's a slight vibration in the image, and, for an instant, the screen darkens. In the last frame, recorded before impact, there's a reflection in the lens. Not a figure, not a shadow. It was an eye. Just that. An eye. Very close to the lens, looking back. It was already past 2 in the morning when I decided to review the forgotten papers inside the desk drawer. Among loose sheets and old envelopes, there was a hardback notebook stained by time, with a slightly frayed spine. It was different from the other materials I found. It didn't seem like accounting nor decorative, and the strangest thing, the first 30 pages were empty. Only on page 31 did the writing begin. The handwriting was firm, slanted to the right, with long strokes. There was something urgent in it, as if it had been written without pauses, with contained anger or controlled fear. If you are reading this, it is already too late. The sentence was heavily underlined, almost tearing the paper. Below, more text, now more spaced out, as if the person had tried to calm down. You'll think it's a coincidence, that it's just an old apartment. But pay attention. Observe the times, the patterns. They come back. They always come back. I slowly leafed through the notebook. Each page was more disturbing than the last. The woman, probably Carla, wrote as if she was trying to warn someone, as if knowing someone else would end up there. Perhaps she herself had gone through something similar. Perhaps she knew it would all happen again. At 3:13 a.m., something crosses the corridor. Don't look. Don't respond. Don't get up. There were repeated notes with times and dates. Always, with the same pattern. Something happened between 3:10 and 3:20 a.m. Sounds, movements, whispers. She recorded the time with obsessive precision. Some pages were scribbled with strange symbols, overlapping circles, broken arrows, triangles, with dashes at the ends. They didn't look like drawings. They were markings. I tried to understand the logic. I couldn't. Further on, I found a sheet stapled to the notebook. It was a hand-drawn sketch of the apartment. The rooms were correctly laid out, but there were lines crossing the walls as if mapping invisible paths. Small dots were marked with a red pen. One of them, in the corner of the corridor, was circled multiple times. I grabbed the camera, positioned it on the counter, and began to narrate the discovery. As I read the excerpts aloud, the living room light flickered for 2 seconds. I kept recording. The flicker returned, This time, longer. The camera captured the moment the lamp trembled, but at the time, the power didn't go out. I remained still, without interrupting. I went back to the notebook. They feed on the recording, not on the gaze. If you record, you sustain, you confirm. The phrases became increasingly disjointed. Some parts were entirely crossed out. Others contained questions she asked herself. What if what I'm seeing is not the end, but the beginning? Did I bring this, or was it always here? The camera began to emit a faint hiss, low but continuous. I touched the built-in microphone, thinking it was interference, but the sound continued, like an internal vibration. I removed the lens and put it back. Nothing changed. Then something fell in the bedroom. A dry, metallic sound. I went there. A chair that was leaning against the wall below the window was on the floor. Lying on its side. There was no wind, no open windows, no impact, just fallen, as if someone had pushed it. I recorded the spot, but the camera glitched again. The image froze, followed by a slight audio delay. The malfunction lasted only briefly, but enough to put me on alert. I returned to the living room, took a deep breath, and continued reading. You don't need to believe, you just need to record. The camera is the cycle. It keeps. It feeds. The words seemed written in a state of conscious despair, as if she knew she wouldn't leave there, as if she accepted that all that was left was to leave instructions for the next person. Don't try to understand. The cycle doesn't end, it just changes observers. I closed the notebook carefully. For the first time, I felt that perhaps all of this wasn't just noise or delusion, that perhaps there was a logic, a structure behind everything, not visible but recordable, and perhaps the camera was indeed part of it. I went back to the hand-drawn map that was stuck in the diary. I placed it on the table and observed it more closely. Each line seemed to indicate a path, as if the person who drew it had mapped the behavior of whatever was inside. It wasn't random. The trajectory repeated, always passing through the same points: the living room, the corridor, in front of the bathroom door. I grabbed the tape measure from the cabinet and measured the stretch between the two most marked points. One of them coincided with the crack in the baseboard, the other with the corner of the bookshelf. As I moved from side to side, I felt a slight difference in air temperature, colder, especially near the corridor. I made a pencil mark on the floor, at the exact spot where the map indicated the crossing, just to see if there would be any change later. Then I went to the apartment's electrical panel, turned the power off and on. The light returned to normal, but the camera, which had been left on the table, was restarting. Black screen, system, noise, an internal click. I opened the file menu to check the recordings. Most were still there, but 3 recordings had corrupted names. One of them had its date modified to the next day. The time was 03:13. At the same moment, my cell phone alarm rang. It was exactly 03:10. I stood still instinctively. I didn't turn off the alarm. I let it ring until it silenced itself. The living room light remained on, but seemed less intense, as if the environment was retaining the luminosity. I moved slowly, to the camera still on. I set it to continuous recording. At exactly 03:13, nothing happened. No sound, no power outage, no shadow. But the silence was different. The kind of silence that doesn't come from the absence of sound, but from the presence of something that isn't manifesting itself. On the drawn map, that was the central time, the transition point. Carla had noted, at 3:13 a.m. something crosses the corridor. I went to the corridor, camera in hand. I recorded the floor, the walls, the lamp on the ceiling. Nothing seemed out of place, but the feeling of presence was undeniable. A slight pressure behind my eyes, like when we enter an environment with thin air. I went back to the living room and sat down. The recording continued. I watched in real time on the camera screen, waiting for something to happen in plain sight. But everything remained still. Until, without warning, the camera image froze for 2 seconds. When it returned, A chair had moved, the same one that had fallen days earlier. Now it was tilted to the side as if it had been dragged. I went over to it. No marks on the floor, no visible explanation, just the displacement. I looked at the ceiling. Nothing. At the window. Closed. Then at the camera, which was still recording. I immediately reviewed the recording. At the exact moment of the malfunction, the screen darkens and a deep noise fills the audio. It's not static, it's a steady, continuous sound, like a low-frequency vibration. I paused, repeated. The sound only appears during the chair's displacement. In the following frames, the object is already out of place. I stopped the recording. I went back to the notebook. Leafing through the final pages, I found a passage that seemed written in a state of breakdown. The handwriting was more irregular, the ink faded. Some words crossed out. But the idea was clear. The cycle does not reveal itself all at once. It presents itself little by little, in noises, in distortions, until you accept that it is there, and start recording of your own free will. At the bottom of the same page, a final warning. If you cross the line, you will never again trust what your eyes see. You will depend on the lens. You will need it, even when you are outside of here. I closed the notebook. I looked around. Nothing had physically changed, but the atmosphere was different. The apartment seemed charged, not with malice, not with a presence, but with a cycle, as if the events were not random, nor conscious, as if they were natural functions of the space. The camera flickered, the light stabilized, and, at that moment, I understood that the apartment was not expelling me, it was training me. I woke up on the living room floor, the camera still on, leaning against the leg of the table. The recording had passed 5 hours. I didn't remember sleeping or lying down. The last thing that came to mind was the drawing in the notebook and the chair moving. I slowly got up, my head heavy as if I had a fever, but there was no heat. The air was cold, static. The silence seemed denser. I recorded a new segment. My voice was different, drier, shorter. It was as if I was starting to talk to someone. I made some coffee. While the water was heating, I reviewed the dawn recording. I fast-forwarded to the last few hours when the camera remained still, pointing at the corridor. For most of the time, nothing happened, but at 04:26 hours, a sound emerged. A voice, deep, low, with a slight rasp in the pronunciation. And the most disturbing thing, it said my name. It didn't scream. It didn't call out. It just stated it, as if identifying me, acknowledging my presence. The sound was clear, direct. There was no misinterpretation. I paused, rewound, played it back with headphones. The voice was there. At the exact moment the camera light flickered, for a fraction of a second. In the background of the image, nothing moved. But after the voice disappeared, a lighter sound appeared, as if someone was breathing on the other side of the corridor door. I got up from the sofa with the recording, paused on the screen and went over there. The corridor was empty, dark. The lamp flickered erratically. I tested the switch. Nothing changed. I returned to the living room. But as I walked away, I heard a dry click. The lamp went out completely. I ran to the camera and turned on my phone's flashlight. I went back to the corridor with the beam of light projected on the floor. Each step made the floorboards creak differently, deeper, more muffled, and as I pointed the flashlight to the end of the corridor, I saw it, not for long, but long enough. A standing figure, tall, motionless, without clear details, as if made of the corridor's own shadow. I couldn't see a face or clothes or a defined outline, but it was there. I stopped. The phone almost slipped from my hand. When I raised the flashlight again, the figure was no longer there. I took 2 steps back, still with the light on. The camera trembled on the tripod, not because of the wind, but because I was trembling. I closed the corridor door and locked it. I sat in the living room for a few minutes trying to organize my thoughts. It was the first time I had seen something like this clearly, and I could no longer tell myself it was an illusion. The camera had recorded it. I had seen it. And this time, I also felt it. I picked up my phone and recorded another audio. This time I didn't say much. I just described the figure. I spoke of the voice, of the breathing, of the lamp. In the middle of the recording, I heard a click behind me, the corridor door. It opened by itself. I slowly looked back. The latch was turned, and the doorknob still wobbled slightly as if someone had just let go. I went there, slowly opened it, and pointed the flashlight inside. The corridor was empty, but the feeling was the same as before. A presence in the air, invisible, but pulsating. I went back to the living room and grabbed the camera. As I stood up, I heard another sound. This time, footsteps, slowly, coming from the kitchen. It wasn't creaking, it wasn't wind. They were heavy footsteps dragging across the floor. 4, then 3, then silence. I ran to the kitchen. Empty. The drawers were open, all of them, even the ones that had been locked with an old latch. The objects inside were untouched, but the drawers, all open in perfect synchronization. I went to close them one by one. Midway, the front door slammed shut. It wasn't open before. I ran to it. It was locked from the inside, but the impact was real. The latch trembled. The door frame was still, vibrating. The doorknob cold as if it had been touched from the outside. I tried to force it open, nothing. The key was on the table. I put it in the lock. It wouldn't go in, as if the internal mechanism had shifted, as if somehow the lock no longer recognized its own key. I went back to the kitchen, turned off all the lights, and grabbed my phone. I started recording with the flashlight. The main camera was still working, but I left it on the tripod. I wanted a more direct recording, closer to my body. The flashlight only illuminated what was directly in front of me. The rest of the house was a block of darkness. I went back to the corridor. With each step, the air seemed thicker. I started to hear my own breathing quicken, not from physical exertion, but from fear. There was no denying anything anymore. Something was there. And now, it was making a point of being noticed. The corridor seemed longer than on other nights. Each step echoed in different rhythms, as if the space was changing as I walked. The phone's flashlight illuminated only a few meters ahead. The rest was lost in an opaque, dense blackness, which wasn't just an absence of light. It was as if the darkness had weight. I recorded as I walked. My hand trembled. The light's focus trembled with it. When I reached the middle of the corridor, a muffled sound came from the living room. I stopped. I listened again. It was as if someone was slowly moving objects, dragging them across the floor. I took 2 steps back. The flashlight illuminated the wall to the right, and for a second it seemed to ripple, as if the plaster had breathed. A subtle bulging, almost imperceptible, but it was there. The surface alive. I lowered the phone and placed my hand on the wall. It was cold, firm, nothing out of the ordinary, but the feeling that something was right behind it, inside the structure, as if the bricks were hiding something, in motion, made me retreat. I went back to the living room. The pictures on the wall were crooked, all of them, slightly tilted to the same side, as if some vibration had traveled through the house. I picked up the main camera. It was still on the display. The recording continued normally, but when I switched to playback mode and scrolled through the last few minutes, the video subtly trembled. Every second, the image seemed displaced by millimeters, as if something was interfering. I laid the equipment on the table and went to the main door. I forced the doorknob. Nothing. The latch remained locked, unmoving. I looked through the gap between the door and the floor. No light from the external corridor, as if the entire building was dark. I pointed the flashlight at the door and recorded the movement of the doorknob. I turned it again. The key still wouldn't fit. Then, out of nowhere, My phone died. The screen went black. Without warning. No battery drain. A heavy silence settled. I could still hear my own breathing, and in the background another sound, slow, repeated, as if something was brushing against the floor. I pressed the power button. The flashlight came back on, and with it, the shock. In front of the kitchen door there was something, not a figure, but a shadow. A dark stain on the wall that wasn't there before. The beam of light flickered when pointed directly at it. The shadow didn't correspond to any object. It was twisted, disproportionate, as if it had been projected by something invisible. I took a step closer. The shadow moved. To the left. Slowly. As if sliding along the wall. My heart raced. The hand holding the phone began to sweat. Another step. The shadow vanished into the corner of the wall. I looked behind me, nothing. At that moment, the bathroom door slammed shut. I ran to it. It was locked from the inside. I spoke loudly without thinking. I asked if anyone was there. No response. I lowered the camera. The sound stopped. I forcefully turned the doorknob. Nothing. I returned to the living room. In the reflection of the turned-off television, something caught my attention. A figure passed behind me, quick, short, without sound. I spun around instantly. Nothing. But the camera was there, recording, and I knew it was captured. I picked up the equipment and reviewed the last few seconds. In the TV's reflection, the figure was visible for only 2 frames. Its shape wasn't discernible, but the silhouette had a firmer outline than any previous recording, enough to recognize that it was standing, and that it was watching me. I threw the phone onto the sofa and sat on the floor. My breathing accelerated. My hands on my face. There was nowhere to run. The door locked, the windows sealed. No sound coming from the outside world. It was as if the apartment was completely isolated, out of reality. I stayed there for a few minutes, maybe more. I didn't time it. The camera fell off the tripod. It simply tipped over as if someone had nudged it with 2 fingers. The impact dislodged the battery. I got up to collect the pieces. When I reconnected it, the recording restarted. The date was wrong. The time was 2 days ahead. Without thinking, I set it to record again. I pointed it at the corridor. The lights remained off, but there was a sound coming from the back. Footsteps, slowly approaching, rhythmic, just like the ones I heard in the kitchen. I pointed the camera. The flashlight didn't reach the end of the corridor, but the footsteps continued. I stopped recording. I left the camera on the floor, and for the first time I allowed myself to say aloud, "I'm not alone here." I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the corner of the living room with my back against the wall and the camera on my lap, as if holding it would protect me somehow. The screen was dark, but the recording continued. I kept the button pressed just for safety, as if stopping the recording would create space for things to happen more intensely. Around 5 in the morning, I decided to go through the camera files again. Most of the videos were intact, but one name caught my attention. Rec. Old. Row 1. I hadn't named it. It wasn't in the folder I usually used. The file was old, but the modification date was from the previous night. I opened the video. The image was grainy with low resolution. The woman in the frame was the same one who appeared in the photos on the bookshelf. Hair tied back, sunken eyes. Sitting on the living room floor just as I was now. The camera trembled in her hands. In the background, the light flickered. There was noise like wind, but the windows were visibly closed. She spoke softly at first. Broken words, labored breathing. "I don't know anymore if I'm talking to myself or to you, but if you're seeing this, don't stay. Leave. Don't record. Don't try to understand." She brought her hand to her forehead. She was sweating, her face pale, her eyes almost empty. They don't want to be seen, but they also don't want to be forgotten. They need someone to keep watching, recording, reliving. The camera moved. She got up with difficulty, went to the corridor. The video started to stutter. Sections skipped. There were abrupt cuts. She was now in the bedroom, then back in the living room. In one of the glitches, she appeared for a second, behind herself. As if there were two recordings happening at the same time. She turned to face the lens again. If you're there, if you've made it this far, I'm so sorry. The image froze for a second. When it returned, she was screaming. But not in anger. It was a scream of panic. Don't watch this, don't stay here, don't record, don't record. She threw the camera against the wall. The image fell, turned sideways. But the audio continued. Noises in the background. Something moving quickly. A wet dragging sound as if something was being pulled. And then silence. The video ended there. No end screen, no name. Just a sudden freeze. I stared at the dark screen for minutes. I knew what I had seen. I knew that recording couldn't have appeared out of nowhere. And more than that, I knew I was starting to repeat the same gestures, the same behavior, the same desperation. I went back to the camera and, without thinking, positioned it in the same place where she had recorded. On the floor, facing the corridor, I sat down in the same way and pressed record. I started to speak, but my voice sounded different, lower, more tense. The phrases came out on their own. I know it sounds crazy, but if anyone is watching this later, listen, don't stay. Don't try to understand. I stopped speaking, not by choice. A sound interrupted me, a loud, dry noise like footsteps on the ceiling. It wasn't the building settling. They were firm footsteps, as if someone was walking on a hollow surface circling the room from above, but the apartment didn't have an upper floor. It was the top floor of the building. I slowly got up and pointed the flashlight at the ceiling. The lamp flickered. With each second, the sound of footsteps grew closer. The camera captured everything. The sound gained a strange weight, as if it was being recorded not by the microphones, but by the structure of the entire apartment. Breathing began to appear in the audio. Not mine. It was stronger, noisy, coming from very close to the lens, as if someone was leaning against it. But when I looked, there was nothing there. The floor trembled. A quick vibration, like a displacement of air under pressure. The chair leaning against the wall tipped over by itself. The noise made me turn quickly, but I didn't see the moment of the fall, only the impact. I turned my gaze back to the corridor. It was darker than before, as if shadow had invaded the space. It wasn't an absence of light. It was a dark presence, something that consumed the air. The phone's flashlight flickered twice, and then suddenly the light went out. Everything went dark. The second the light went out, the apartment ceased to feel like a place. It was as if everything had been sucked into a space where time, sound, and direction no longer followed any known rules. I stood still, trying to hear what was around me. But the silence was strange, deep, as if underwater. I held my phone tightly, trying to turn the flashlight back on. The screen flickered but didn't respond. Just a faint light in the corner, like a dying glow. The main camera was still on the floor recording. The red LED remained lit, fixed. It was the only visible light. I shuffled my feet to where it was. I knelt down and brought my face close to the lens. The display trembled. Unstable image, as if trying to capture something in constant motion. In the corner of the screen, a dark spot was forming, small but growing. It wasn't a defect. It was something approaching. Slowly, the microphone sound began to saturate. Breathing, noisy, overlapping. Mine. The camera was picking up something very close, but I couldn't see it. I turned around. Nothing. I pointed the lens at the corridor. The dark spot continued to grow in the image. It seemed to pulsate. That's when the camera captured a voice, different from the previous one, closer, whispered. It didn't say my name. It just repeated a phrase. Stop recording. I took a step back. The red LED went out. The camera fell to its side. I stood there, still, my breathing rapid, trying to hear any other sound. And I did. A slow, heavy dragging, like bare feet on the floor, coming from the kitchen. I didn't run. I didn't speak. I just knelt down and activated the phone's audio recording. The screen still wasn't working, but the microphone turned on. I began to narrate what I was feeling. I'm hearing footsteps coming from the kitchen. The light went out. The camera stopped. I don't know if I'm still alone. The dragging stopped. The next instant, the bathroom door slammed again. Hard. As if something had collided against it. But it didn't break. It just shook. The echo spread through the apartment. The vibration passed through the walls. I sat leaning against the bookshelf and left the phone recording on my lap. I closed my eyes. For a moment, I was exhausted. Not physically, it was something else. As if my mind was giving in to the environment. As if resisting was demanding too much energy. I opened my eyes when I heard the second knock. Not in the bathroom. On the front door. 1, 2, 3 times. Rhythmic. Dry. Clear. I ran to the door. Leaned my ear against it. Nothing. No breathing, no footsteps. Only silence. I looked underneath. No shadow, no movement. Just the narrow beam of light coming from outside. For the first time, I noticed that it wasn't flickering. It was still. Dead. As if the world outside had also frozen. I went back to the living room. The camera on the floor now showed a distorted image. Fragments. As if several different frames had overlapped. In a fraction of a second, I saw my own face from outside, looking through the window. Then, the same window, with someone standing inside. I turned off the display, or tried to. The button didn't respond. I took out the battery, waited, put it back. The camera turned on by itself. It started recording before I pressed anything. The kitchen light flickered. For the first time in hours, the lamp turned back on. But the light was different. A paler tone, almost bluish, like old television light. I went there. The sound of footsteps started again, this time in the corridor. But I was in the corridor. I stopped. The footsteps continued. Coming from me, or going in the opposite direction? I looked at my feet. They weren't moving, but the camera was recording movement. In the recording, I was walking, even though I was still. The image showed my body in motion, as if someone was imitating me, or as if I was being reproduced. The light flickered once more. The sound intensified. Now it was a wet sound, dragging, as if something was being pulled across the floor, but with flesh, weight, resistance. I stood still. The fallen chair began to drag itself, from one side of the room to the other, not fast but steadily, as if it was being pulled by someone who knew what they were doing. The camera fell from my lap. It hit the floor with the lens facing me. I remained still. The recording showed my face in shock, and something behind me, a blur, but this time, clearer, with an outline, with arms, with a face. The camera trembled on its own. The lens flickered. And then, everything went dark again. I woke up to the sound of the camera, a sharp, brief beep. I was on the living room sofa, fully dressed, shoes still on my feet. Morning light entered through the window, filtered by the dirty curtain. Everything was calm, silent, almost comfortable. But something was wrong. My body position was too rigid, as if I had been placed there. Arms crossed over my chest, head perfectly propped up. It wasn't how I slept. It wasn't how I usually woke up. The camera was on, resting on the table. Recording. The filming time showed 5 continuous hours. The last segment saved with the previous night's date. But I didn't remember lying down, or turning off any lights. The last thing in my memory was the image of the figure behind me, captured by the lens. I slowly got up and went to the camera. I paused the recording. The image was normal, color, sound, focus, no apparent glitches. But upon opening the file gallery, I noticed something strange. There was a new video, one I didn't remember starting. The marked time was before my arrival at the apartment, 2 nights before the first official recording. File name, entry 0. I opened it. The recording showed the apartment door, filmed from the inside, as if someone was waiting. The sound was pure silence, no external noise, no vibration. After a few minutes, the camera trembled. Someone entered the frame. Me. The same coat, the same backpack. The same way of looking around as if seeing everything for the first time. The recording showed my entry into the apartment. Every movement, every gesture. Before I had even pressed the record button, the camera had already captured it. I paused. I advanced frame by frame. I saw myself closing the door, walking through the living room, running my hand over the bookshelf, flicking the kitchen light switch. Every action corresponded exactly to my memory. But this video wasn't mine. It didn't originate from me. The camera was recording on its own. I went back to the gallery. There were other files with strange names. Entry 1, Entry 2, up to Entry 6. All dated from previous days, months earlier. In all of them, the same camera position, the same room, different people entering, always alone, always carrying little, always with the same confused look. I watched 2 of these videos. In the first, an older man, gray hair, simple clothes. In the second, a young woman with a haggard face. Neither of them spoke. They just walked through the apartment in silence as if they were being watched. The next video, Exit 0, showed the same man standing before the door. He tried to turn the doorknob, looked back. Then he sat on the floor. The recording cut. The file ended there. I stood still before the camera, trying to understand what I was seeing. It didn't make sense. But at the same time, it did. The pattern was there. The movements, the pauses, the errors. All the visitors repeated the same actions, as if there was a script, as if the apartment itself was conducting. I went to the bathroom mirror. I stared at myself for a while. In the reflection, something seemed out of place. Not my face, but the background. On the wall behind me, near the cracked tile, something was written. I turned around immediately. The wall was clean, but in the reflection the word remained. A name. Mine. Written in small, almost faded letters. As if someone had run a finger over moisture and dragged the ink of their own name until it partially disappeared. I pressed my hand against the wall. It was damp, cold, but with no mark. Only the mirror showed it. I went back to the living room. I looked at the apartment map left by Carla. The transition points, the symbols on the walls. Everything made more sense now. It wasn't a study of what was happening there. It was a manual, a mapping for the next one. For me. And perhaps, now, for someone after me. I picked up the notebook again. The diary of the woman who was there before. I flipped through the pages more carefully. In the final sheets where the scribbles already blended with the words, I noticed something I had ignored. A repeated phrase. They don't need you to understand, just to continue. This phrase appeared several times on different pages, like a reminder, an anchor, and beside it, in smaller letters, a name. The same name that was in the reflection. Mine. I didn't remember reading that before, but now, it seemed inevitable. I went back to the bathroom mirror. The name was still there, visible in the reflection. I rubbed the surface with a dry cloth. The mark disappeared, but when I looked away, it returned. It only appeared when I didn't focus on it directly. I went back to the living room. I played the Entry 0 video again. I watched my own body moving in an almost mechanical way. The way I touched objects, walked around the room, looked into corners, It was like watching someone trying to remember how to behave. A performance. But it was me. I fast-forwarded to the end of the video. In the last frame, before it cut, there was a pause. The camera continued recording, and I in the recording looked directly at the lens, as if I knew I was being watched. As if I was looking. Now. The image froze there. Eyes fixed. Body still. The gaze empty. I closed the video. The file froze. For a few seconds. Black screen. Then a notification appeared. New video saved. Entry 7. I clicked without thinking. It was the same video. Same beginning. The door. The entry. But with one difference. The person entering rec wasn't me. It was another figure. Similar clothes, similar steps. But it wasn't me. Or it wasn't me anymore. I stopped playback. I closed the camera. I turned everything off. Silence settled in. By instinct, I went to the front door. I turned the doorknob. It worked. The key entered the lock. There was no resistance. Nothing was blocking the exit, nothing but doubt. I stood there, the door ajar, the building corridor ahead, natural light, distant street sounds, everything normal, as if nothing had happened. As if everything I had experienced inside was part of a dreamed sequence. But as I took a step outside, the sound of the camera restarting came from the living room. There was no power. I didn't plug it back in, but I heard the beep. The sound of the red LED lighting up. The click of the lens adjusting. I slowly turned back. The camera was standing. On. Recording. On the display, the image of the living room. Empty. I took 2 more steps. The lens framed me, the focus adjusted, and the name on the display changed. Before, recording 43. Now, entry 8. It was as if the apartment had reset, as if it was ready to start over, but with another visitor, or with the same story retold with new words. I looked at the wall next to the door. Scratched in faded paint, there was a list of names. All erased, except the last one. Mine. I ran, my finger over it. The paint easily faded, but the mark remained imprinted on the plaster, like a faint but permanent scar. I went back to the living room. I sat in the same spot on the sofa. The camera fixed on me. The cycle seemed complete, but deep down, something said it wasn't ending. It was just restarting. If you've made it this far, I'm sorry. Not because you saw something forbidden, or because you're now caught in some curse or paranormal cycle. It's not about that. It never was. I'm sorry because perhaps now you understand what I understood too late. The truth is, I don't know how I left that apartment. I don't remember the moment I opened the door. I don't remember going down the stairs, crossing the lobby, or going out onto the street. I just was outside. But since then, nothing feels exactly outside or inside. I spent days trying to piece together the timeline, checking the files, the videos, the audios. But everything is fragmented, misaligned. File names change on their own. Some videos duplicate, others disappear, and some appear. Recordings I never made, with impossible angles. There's one, for example, that shows my face while I sleep. The worst part? I don't remember sleeping since I left there. Today, around 3:17 a.m., I received a notification on my phone. It was from the streaming app. The video started playing on its own, without warning, without scheduling. It went live, on air. But I wasn't recording anything. I opened the app. My bedroom camera was on, by itself, recording the darkness. For 4 minutes, no one appeared. Then there was a noise, and for a second, someone appeared with their back to the camera, standing in the corner of the screen, motionless. The most disturbing part, I recognized the shirt. It was the same one I wore on my first night in apartment 43. I thought about deleting everything, closing the channel, disappearing from the internet. But The video was already playing, and the number of views kept climbing even after I took down the stream. That's when a thought came to me that I couldn't ignore anymore. Maybe I never left. Maybe the cycle no longer needs a physical place. Maybe the apartment followed me. Or worse, maybe I became it. Sometimes, when I look directly at the camera, I don't recognize myself. My eyes don't react to the light properly. My eyelids blink at a different rhythm. There was one time I recorded a simple, quick video. When I reviewed it in a single frame, my eyes were turned inward, as if they were looking inside. Now, I need to ask you something. Did you see anything I didn't see? Any shadow, any reflection, any figure in the background? Comment below. Comment now. If this video is deleted soon, or if any part is cut or the channel goes offline, it's because I finally understood what she meant by that. The camera never lies. It just chooses when to show. And sometimes, it shows after you can no longer go back.